Cracklin' Oat Bran, Blessings of Light, Introduction! Hi, it's Cody, your news consigliere, here to advise you amongst the tricky, multifaceted news mafia disputes. Does someone need to get news whacked, or can it be smoothed out by forget about it? Who has to sleep with the news fishes? Man, those fishes are such harlots. I can tell this is not a metaphor I'm going to be able to keep up. So I'm going to just drop it. Like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas should have dropped it when Billy Batts kept bringing up his old shine box. Remember movies? Okay, enough foreplay. Here's some news. Let's say you can't just blame the mafia for all of society's problems, and you need another shadowy and mysterious presence. Someone you can point to as the culprit behind any number of preconceived societal ills. Someone who hopefully has a palindromic last name. So, Daryl Hannah? Is it that fish harlot, Daryl Hannah? The harlibut?
George Soros funds the Open Society. The Open Society gives $15 million to these groups that are protesting on behalf of Hamas.
So what is Soros' goal here? I think just chaos.
The reason is he's had a lifelong dream of one world government, of elites, redistributing wealth and setting up rules for the rest of us.
These hollowed out cities, this is a symptom of America's decline. And one of the biggest reasons is because you have George Soros funding these radical left-wing district attorneys. They get into office and they say they're not going to prosecute crimes they disagree with. The inmates start running the asylum.
You said he wants to erode the very fabric of civilization, and Soros hates humanity. Like, when you do something like that, do you
I think that's true. That's my opinion.
It's like he wants these cities to fall apart. He wants crime to flourish. It's almost like he's an evil person in a Batman movie.
Wow. Sure seems like this George Soros? I don't know. This guy is up to no good, even being likened to an evil person in a Batman movie by Joe Rogan. Ooh. Notes to self, come up with a simple term for evil person in a movie. It's weird we don't have one of those yet. Anywho, if you're just watching those clips, it seems pretty hard to tell which criticisms are legitimate and which are tinfoil hat stuff. George Soros has been accused of everything from helping the Nazis during World War II to plotting the overthrow of the US government. Without looking it up, I'm guessing he's why the Earth is secretly flat, which it is! So, hey, let's look into those accusations, because even if a lot of them aren't true, maybe he is actually secretly funding things that most of us wouldn't care for, right? After all, George Soros is a billionaire, whom I don't think are our friends, and billionaires tend to put a lot of their money toward philanthropic efforts, though in many cases, those philanthropic efforts don't actually do anything good. Not to mention that George Soros has donated money to the campaigns of progressive district attorney candidates, which is what Ron DeSantis was getting at there during his, cue the sad trombone, campaign for president. You're not going to do the sound? Well, now it's too late, so what? Of course, those Soros donations don't seem any different from how, for example, wealthy Silicon Valley goons like David Sachs pumped money into recall campaigns against progressive DAs. For DeSantis, it seems like he's just targeting Soros for giving money to political causes that he doesn't like, because he's expressed no concern whatsoever over the dozens of billionaires who've donated to his various campaigns over the years. Because why would he? So maybe the problem here is that money has too much influence in politics, and we shouldn't want any billionaire trying to buy any political office. But that's just one of the dozens of allegations made about this old withered fart. And it is kind of the most normal one, which is why I started there. But of course, we have a lot more episode ahead of us. Oh, look, it's the episode up ahead. Coming at you. Beep, beep. Okay, so who is George Soros really? How did he make his money? Where does he keep the money? Is it secure or easy to access? What kind of things does he support? How did he become the right's boogeyman? Or, if you prefer, bogeyman? Could I get in the same room with his money? And how much anti-Semitism are we going to uncover in finding out? Spoiler alert for this episode, lots. Okay, that one was for me. Cue the real title. George Soros. What's like his whole deal? Nice, I love a This Friggin' Guy episode where we talk about a friggin' guy. Not like what pundits might be saying about him, but his actual background, who he actually is and what he stands for. He was born right here on Earth in Budapest, or Budapest if you prefer, Hungary, or Hungary if you prefer, in 1930, or that's it, 1930, a time before the invention of the modern toothbrush. Before that, people brushed their teeth with bristles made from animal hair, or I assume, just scraped their teeth up against a washboard, or whatever else was lying around at the time. Cigarette butts, probably. His family was Jewish, but as with many well-off Hungarian Jews at the time, they tended to shy away from their roots. The young George Soros, quote, beamed when other children would tell him, "You don't look Jewish." Nothing made him feel happier than to be told he did not have the appearance of a Jew. Later in life, he even jokingly told other people that he grew up in a Jewish anti-Semitic home. This kind of thing wasn't uncommon among minority Jewish populations in Europe, especially as anti-Semitism was on the rise at the time. His family even changed their last name from Schwartz to Soros in 1936. This isn't very important, but a childhood friend described young Soros as a very pretty little boy. A real weird-ass compliment that none of my childhood friends ever used to describe me. I'm looking at you, Kyle Dietrich. Was I not pretty enough, Kyle? Was I not pretty enough for you, Kyle? Fuck you, Kyle. I'm so... I did my best. At any rate, Soros may not have been a practicing Jew, but that kind of thing didn't really matter much to, the Nazis, who invaded and occupied Hungary in March 1944. For you younger viewers, invading and occupying other nations are things Nazis used to do before they were able to get Disney World season passes and run social media sites. Instead of fleeing Hungary, Soros and his family survived the war by obtaining forged documents suggesting they were Christian, and he even briefly posed as the godson of a man who worked for Hungary's Ministry of Agriculture. No beard growing or Nazi coat wearing necessary. Soros' documents bore the name Sandor Kiss, and in 1944, he accompanied his phony godfather to the estate of a wealthy Jew who had used his influence to flee the country. This is where we get the Nazi collaborator rumor, because that fake godfather was there to inventory the valuables left behind for Nazis to steal, with a 13-year-old Soros along for the ride. So, yeah, not exactly a member of the Schutzstaffel. He was a kid who was only there because he was hiding from the Nazis. But despite very obviously not being a Nazi collaborator, this story has been used against him. In 2018, Roseanne Barr would claim that he, quote, turned in his fellow Jews to be murdered in German concentration camps and stole their wealth. That didn't happen, and is a very silly thing to say. She did apologize for tweeting that after she was fired from her show for a bunch of other offensive tweets. Can you believe The Conners has been on for 6 seasons? Network TV, man, it's like another world out there. Anyway, if you're wondering how such a falsehood could spin out of control, I have to point out that, in the interests of being fair like a maiden and balanced like a balanced maiden, that Soros himself appeared, at best, unprepared for questions about that 1944 incident during a 60 Minutes interview in 1998.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, so the reason confiscating a bunch of Jewish property wouldn't have sent him to the psychiatric couch is, I'd reckon, because he didn't do that. Again, he was 13. They didn't put him to work. He was too busy listening to the Verve Pipe and hiding erections. I mean, sure, whether that clip has selective editing or if Soros genuinely didn't recognize how he was coming off, it doesn't make him look great. But that one kind of weird interview from more than 25 years ago is largely responsible for the narrative that he helped the Nazis or even is a Nazi, even though, really can't stress this enough, he was a Jew hiding from the Nazis during this time. Remember that scene in The Zone of Interest where the Nazis are discussing the logistics of exterminating Hungary's 700,000 Jews? That included 13-year-old George Soros. Not by name, but he was included. And don't worry, that isn't one of those scenes that is apparently impossible to interpret. But let's keep going with Soros's youth, as we've got plenty of brainworms to dig from the muck. Got one! Oh, get in there! Ooh, all right, here we go. Soros and his family had some close calls during the Nazi occupation, but survived until Soviet and Romanian forces liberated Budapest in early 1945. The same couldn't be said for hundreds of thousands of other Hungarian Jews executed in labor camps or killed during the siege. Having wealth and connections undoubtedly helped his family survive, and Soros wouldn't have been able to go on to make $1 squillion had it not been for forged and purchased identities. In 1947, shortly after turning 17, he left for England and ultimately studied at the London School of Economics, where he was mentored by Karl Popper, an influential philosopher who coined the phrase, suck it in, suck it in, suck it in, if you're Rin Tin Tin or Anne Boleyn, make a desperate move. That's the guy from Blues Traveler, I think. Wait, is he the same guy? There's no way to know. Anyway, along with forming Blues Traveler, Karl Popper promoted the idea of the open society, which is kind of what it sounds like. That individuals should be free to decide how to live their lives without being repressed by a fascist or totalitarian government. In essence, a pluralist, liberal democracy. For someone like George Soros, who'd spent his teen years changing identities and fearing for his life because he was Jewish, this sounded pretty good. It wasn't fascism, but it certainly wasn't socialism either. So in 1956, Soros moved to a place that seemed to hate both of those things, the United States, or more specifically, New York City, the apple of unusual size for an apple. He planned to work on Wall Street for 5 years, save $500,000, which is more than $5 million in today's simoleons, and then go back to the UK to be a philosopher. Ha! The frivolities of youth. Yes, it seems as if Soros liked money too much to spend his time philosophizing, or he realized perhaps he could do both. The money thing and the thinking about stuff thing. And he credits his remarkable success in finance to the idea of reflexivity, that there are feedback loops based on economic decisions people make due to a perception of the market that end up impacting the market itself. Does that make sense? It doesn't to me. Probably why I'm not rich. And the gambling. Here's how Soros describes it. Quote, in situations that have thinking participants, the participants' view of the world is always partial and distorted. That is the principle of fallibility. The other is that these distorted views can influence the situation to which they relate because false views lead to inappropriate actions. That is the principle of reflexivity. For instance, treating drug addicts as criminals creates criminal behavior. It misconstrues the problem and interferes with the proper treatment of addicts. Wow, well, he's right about that. It's weird when a billionaire is right about a societal problem. It's jarring even. I am jarred right now. And when it comes to using this idea to make money, he wasn't just whistling Dixie, or as they call it in Hungary, whistling the Metzek mountain range. After bouncing around as an arbitrage trader and then a VP at various firms, he founded Soros Fund Management in 1970, which was later renamed Quantum Fund. And we're going to skip ahead a bit here to the 1990s, not just because a hedge fund manager slowly making millions isn't that interesting, but because we don't have Margot Robbie in a bathtub to explain how it all works. I mean, we have Margot Robbie standing just off camera. I just don't have a bathtub. Go home, Margot! Margot stinking Robbie, you stink! Go home! Get out of here! P.U. Margot! She's always hanging around the set. Why, P.U. See, that's why they put her in the bath. Because she's stinky. You smell, Margot. But what's really important here are two events in the Pearl Jammin' 90s that took him from millionaire to billionaire and made him one of the most successful currency speculators of all time. I'm going to talk through all of this, but will not get in a bathtub. The water burns us. First, in 1990, Britain joined the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, aka the ERM, which fixed the exchange rates of European currencies to the German mark, a step toward transitioning toward the euro, a single currency for the entire continent. This ended up being a bad idea for a number of reasons we will not get into here, lest we ask this guy to crawl out of his K-hole, which we're not going to do. But George Soros greatly profited by taking a $1 billion short position on the British pound. Other investors did this as well, but none as aggressively as Soros. Basically, his fund borrowed a jolly good trove of pounds and sold them for other more stable currencies. This helped drive demand for those currencies up, as well as the supply of the pound. And before you know it, Bob's your uncle, Bagsy skint, chinwag, you've chuffed the cunt, Britain can't afford to prop up its currency. It has to withdraw from the ERM, and the value of the pound plummeted like a dodgy old, in it. And Soros is said to have broken the Bank of England on what became known as Black Wednesday. He made $1 billion that day by aggressively putting pressure on an unstable currency. Does this mean he caused it himself? Well, he wasn't the one who made some of the bad economic decisions in the first place. Hat tip to Margaret Thatcher there. Yeah, tap to the hat, cherry hat maiden. But he did egg it all on. He was like the Jack Nicholson nodding meme, and he greatly profited from what would result in high unemployment and cuts to the UK's welfare system. Now, you could argue, as some have, that Black Wednesday was ultimately good for the UK in that it allowed for lower interest rates and increased growth in the decades that followed. On the other hand, perhaps betting on the financial ruin of 60 million people is bad. Like a bad, evil thing to do. But I guess that depends on who you ask. For example, if you asked a billionaire or not. A similar thing happened in our second event, the 1997 Asian financial crisis. This was a series of currency devaluations that started in Thailand and then spread to countries like Malaysia, South Korea, and Indonesia, though the causes of this crisis are less agreed upon. Again, speculative investors thought Thailand was over-leveraged and doubted its currency's strength while fixed to the US dollar. This time, however, the leaders of some of those Asian countries directly blamed Soros for what happened. Malaysian authoritarian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad called him a moron who had intentionally destroyed his nation's economy for financial gain. He also, incidentally, called Soros a Jew a bunch of times. I'm not sure how that's relevant, but we'll put a little SS pin in that for now. While Soros agreed that his funds focused on these teetering currencies, he claimed his actions actually gave Malaysia a softer landing than it would have had otherwise. Mahathir, who is also still alive at 98, by the way, note to self to check on that before we release this video. Is he, just put on screen if he's still alive. He said that currency trading should be banned to prevent these kinds of economic crises. George Soros, unsurprisingly, came out against that idea. So that's the first part of this whole story. The guy became massively wealthy by betting against weak currencies and used large infusions of capital to exacerbate those currency failures. Probably. Money's fake. I could be saying anything right now, actually. I'll check with the bathtub. But it's not exactly a good thing to do. It's kind of something an evil person in a movie would do. We gotta think of a better word for that. Okay. Of course, he has also spent $32 billion on philanthropy through his foundation in the past few decades, according to that foundation. Not that that's necessarily good either. So after the break, we're going to take a look at what all of that money has gone toward and how he became the right wing's monster of the week. Century. Enjoy these ads for products. I assume products. Hey, it's me. Hi, how are you? I'm good. Been offloading a lot of crates of hollandaise sauce lately. Had to learn Dutch. And lucky for Cody, I used Babbel. Oh, yeah. That's the sound of learning right there. Babbel is a language learning app that actually works. Language is everything, after all. It's good to know multiple languages, if only to navigate a country or talk to customs officials. And why pay hundreds of dollars for a tutor when you take Babbel's 10-minute lessons designed by over 200 language experts? These are lessons specifically designed by real people for real conversations. meaning that it's all rooted in real-life situations. This is probably why they have over 16 million subscriptions sold. In fact, all of their courses come with a 20-day money-back guarantee. Unlike my hollandaise sauce. Sorry folks, you buy it, you keep it! Sometimes you find bones in hollandaise sauce. That's natural. It means it's fresh sauce. And thanks to Babbel, I know now how to say you work off your debt in both Dutch and Norwegian. And here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/more news. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/more news, spelled BABBEL.com/more news. Rules and restrictions may apply, or as they say in another language. The hook brings you back! We were talking about George Soros, a relatively low-profile billionaire, given that he doesn't own a platform famous for being the place people go to write, "She ebbin' on my kneeser till I Scrooge." At any rate, once he became very wealthy, it was time to put some effort into that whole open society dilly he had learned from the guy from Rusted Root or whatever. Specifically, he wanted to fund efforts to promote open societies in Eastern Europe, back when most Eastern European nations were either part of or heavily influenced by the Soviet Union. Remember, no matter what you've heard from Timberland Crucklesby, George Soros isn't a communist, and notably, doesn't like communism. He started his first Open Society Foundation in his native Hungary in 1984. 1984! It's just like 1984! Helping to improve communication in the communist country by importing hundreds of photocopiers, which allowed for the spreading of previously banned literature. The foundation funded local universities and their student journals and even paid for activist students to study abroad. One of those students was current Hungarian authoritarian strongman Viktor Orbán, a tidbit you may remember from our Hungary episode, one of those reflexivity/unintended consequences type things. Foreshadowing! Be careful who you educate, as they may just be the next Darth Sidious, etc. Darth Bado. Soros established similar anti-communist foundations throughout the 1980s in places like China, the Soviet Union, and Poland, hoping to foster a new generation of free thinkers and earning rave reviews from many Republicans who liked that he was aligned with final boss Ronald Reagan against communism. By the 1990s, Soros had announced his intentions to make contributions toward domestic programs in the United States, including drug reform and decreasing political advertising on television. Starting in 1994! He put tens of millions of dollars toward efforts to legalize and decriminalize drugs. Probably because of that thing he said earlier, where criminalizing drugs doesn't do anything except turn people into criminals. Good idea. We're not keeping score here, but if we were, he'd get a Cody buck, which is what I call points. It's an imperfect system. I should change the name of stuff. He was still not a mainstream name to conservative media folk, but this is where the rumblings began. In the late 90s, 8-time presidential non-factor and conspiro-fascist Lyndon LaRouche put out a series of articles referring to Soros the Golem and calling him the Queen's drug pusher. Now look, we will be here for a long time if I start going through every example of anti-Semitic imagery and speculative skull and bones style connect the dots theorizing. So let's just say that LaRouche repeated the Soros was a Nazi lie and devoted several paragraphs to the Rothschild connection. And you could purchase a full report on him for the low price of $100 for a report on Soros. God, that's in 90s money. You could have bought like 9 Spin Doctors albums for that. Around the same time, Soros himself was getting more involved politically, not just donating to causes and starting foundations, but meeting with and attempting to influence politicians himself. But far from being a puppet master pulling all the strings, he was initially viewed with some skepticism, especially when it came to his opinion on foreign relations. According to one Clinton administration official in 1995, quote, "Sometimes his speeches and articles are overly idealistic. In that sense, people take him with a grain of salt. The image you get from reading about Soros in this time is of a guy who desperately wants to have the amount of influence that people in later decades would attribute to him. Kind of like Elon Musk today. He got super rich, was credited as one of the world's great financial analysts, and wanted others to know his ideas. Remember, he wanted to be a philosopher, like Socrates, or Descartes, or Nietzsche. He's written a bunch of books trying to spread these ideas to the masses. The fact that he's been at it for decades and our country is still teetering on the brink of fascism is kind of evidence that he hasn't been nearly as influential as all those people at the beginning would have you believe. It's also kind of interesting how when a person gets really rich, they think their opinions are suddenly important, even if they're bad opinions, like the opinions of an evil person in a movie. And I guess it's a little reassuring that these people don't have as much power as we seem to think. It's also worth noting that the early criticism of Soros' public activities weren't all from the right. According to Reason Magazine Books editor Jesse Walker, quote, "I first started encountering anti-Soros invective in the 1990s. Interestingly, it was coming from the left. People were worried that he was buying up the movement, or, in a less conspiratorial vein, that the possibility of chasing Soros dollars would distort the independent left's activities. In hindsight, it may have been a good idea to tell activists and political groups on the left to take as much money as you can. In the future, we lose all of our journalists, and right-wing media has a seemingly endless supply of money. Like, we joke about cashing the Soros checks now, but please, 90s leftists, take the Soros money! Also, watch out for 9/11. I will let you guess what that means. But as we inched into the current millennium, we got closer to the right-wing boogeymanification of George Soros. The transition from ordinary piece of shit billionaire to the fantasy of a murderous demon shit billionaire intent on world domination. Think of George Soros as Walter White in season 1 of Breaking Bad, and the American right-wing's conception of him as Walter White in seasons 3 through 5. Season 1 Walter White was not exactly a good guy, but season 5 Walter White is an all-time evil guy in a movie, in a TV show. An evil guy, an evil character. Like the opposite of the good guy. Fuck! We'll get there. George's most direct entry into U.S. politics came in late 2003, when he committed more than $15 million towards efforts to defeat the re-election of George W. Bush. After re-examination, maybe that money would have been better spent building a giant cannon and firing whatever was left over directly toward the sun. Bush ended up winning re-election since his opponent was, tragically, a half-sentient jar of mustard. He gurgled, but we simply couldn't hear his words. Alas, if only he gurgled more articulately. Nevertheless, Republicans did not like some billionaire elite waving his money around trying to influence a presidential election. That's their job, which they did very well by financing a discredited group to say the dry mustard jar was bad at war. The Republican House Speaker, Dennis Hastert, a man whose name you really should bing if you don't know it, went on Fox News at the time to shit-talk Soros, saying, "You know, I don't know where George Soros gets his money. I don't know where, if it comes overseas or from drug groups, or where it comes from." Drug groups. Very odd thing to say, since the source of Soros' money wasn't a secret. We talked about it earlier in this video. Also, again, drug groups? What are drug groups? Just seems like Dennis Hastert is just admitting that he doesn't know how to look stuff up. Hey, what was the source of your money, Dennis? Oh, right, hundreds of thousands of dollars of pension checks you took until you were finally cut off for being a convicted child sex offender. Like I said, bing the guy. Just don't let him bing you. Know what I'm saying? Because of the sex offenses. Republican Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert. Despite the increasing attacks, however, Soros was not dissuaded. He and other progressive millionaires and billionaires, still licking their gold-plated wounds from Bush's re-election, pooled their money into the Democracy Alliance, which would fund liberal think tanks and other groups. Media Matters for America, which was brand new at the time, received a huge influx of funding. He also paid Republicans, by the way, when it suited his aims. But it's the Media Matters stuff that drew the ire of Bill O'Reilly, an Erlenmeyer flask of distilled Irish-American anger and resentment. He didn't like that Media Matters would take the bold, commie action of accurately reporting the things he said on his TV and radio shows. He lashed out at Media Matters frequently in this era, and you can understand why. A media organization taking money from rich people to report things exclusively from their point of view? That's their job! How dare you do the us thing to us? This culminated in a 2007 segment on the O'Reilly Factor that pointed the finger at Soros specifically, and it may have been the first time most everyday John Q. Republicans heard his name.
Factor has been investigating far-left billionaire George Soros, a man who wants to impose a radical left agenda on America. And under the radar, he is making great progress. Soros has set up a complicated political operation designed to do two things: buy influence among some liberal politicians and smear people with whom he disagrees. Now, here's a chart of how Soros and a few other wealthy radicals who help him are funneling money into the political process. Stay with me on this.
Okay, Bill, I'll stay with you. But those are a lot of arrows. I gotta tell you, I typically have a 4-arrow limit. And if you're asking your audience to stay with me on this in the first minute of a segment, usually not a good sign. Bill, oh, are you still alive? Are you the Dead Fox News guy? Probably still alive. But the stuff he's saying with all those arrows, of course, not very complicated. Soros was a billionaire who gave his money to a bunch of different advocacy groups, some of which were giving money to a website that he didn't like. Again, I don't disagree that wealthy financiers have too much influence in politics, but guys like O'Reilly were trying to have it both ways, criticizing Soros-linked groups for funding Media Matters, but giving the Koch brothers a pass on their financing of things like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and Americans for Prosperity, a group that literally funded the freaking Tea Party movement. None of this is complicated. It's just money going to things. And people like to pick which money is bad or shady based on where it's going. O'Reilly even said there weren't shadowy figures behind the Tea Party, unlike Soros and these move-on people. He's just picking and choosing because suddenly somebody was reporting negatively on things he said. I mean, Democracy Alliance was directly modeled after the Koch network. They're the same things, just with different political aims. But I'm sorry, Bill. I got ahead of myself. I was staying with you on this.
Finally, George Soros has given the radical left organization Move On many, many millions of dollars. This group actively supports liberal politicians like Howard Dean and John Edwards. It also organizes demonstrations promoting left-wing causes.
Ah, yes, radical left-wing organizations supporting... Wait. That... Oh, really? Okay. Howard Dean and John Edwards? I'm double checking. Hold on. Yeah. Howard Dean and John Edwards? Apparently, Soros supported Maoist mouth foamers. Howard Dean and John Edwards? So yeah, he's not really pointing out anything worthy of all those conspiracy arrows. It's not a conspiracy if it's just what we allow people to do with money. Though I guess you can say someone is supporting radicals if you put the word radicals before the name. Like, did you hear that Kickstarter is helping to support the Radical Mystery Science Theater 3000? Unbelievable! So what we actually learned here is that advocacy groups exist, and those groups often get funding from rich people. Incidentally, this was the earliest incident we could find of the Soros pays for left-wing protests thing that has followed pretty much every left-of-center protest for the past 15 years. All because one of his groups gave money to Move On once in 2004. Okay, Bill, let's continue. Any big reveals?
In the weeks to come, we'll have more on Soros and his operations, including naming more of the mainstream media that is actively helping him, which includes Rosie O'Donnell.
Dun dun dun! So breaches the scaly head of the great serpent. George Soros was funding Rosie O'Donnell! Can you believe it? That he was really wasting his money. He was pumping millions into boosting the profiles of Howard Dean, John Edwards, and Rosie O'Donnell, people all of our viewers under 25 are, I'm sure, intimately familiar with. I want to emphasize here that I'm not supporting this so much as pointing out that Soros wasn't only doing this political wheeling and dealing during this time. He was still doing regular old shitty billionaire stuff, like being convicted in France of insider trading and fined more than $2 million, a decision he appealed and lost. Wow, $2 whole million he had to pay, oh my stars! Even into his golden years, in which he has objectively been since a white guy could have this hairstyle and be considered a sex icon, he just wanted to make money. My point is that there has always been legitimate stuff worth criticizing about Soros or any billionaire, especially one that involves themselves in politics. But O'Reilly really wanted people to see this as some kind of X-Files level conspiracy, when in reality, he's just explaining how rich people work. So okay, Bill, we gotta move on. Anything else you've got for us?
He set his sights on changing the basic fabric of this country.
Well, that's right. George Soros is really the Dr. Evil of the whole world of left-wing foundations. In fact, one of his most chilling quotes a few years ago was that the main obstacle to a stable and just world is the United States. He really hates this country.
Okay, let's settle down. To be fair, but not balanced, that is a paraphrasing of a real Soros quote from one of his books, but it was specifically criticizing the Bush administration. So the O'Reilly segment was stupid and didn't really reveal anything about Soros, but it's important to point out that there was nothing anti-Semitic in it. Nobody on the show mentioned that Soros was Jewish or implied anything conspiratorial based on that fact. That seems like a pretty low bar, but you'll have to keep that in mind as we transition into the 2010s, when Glenn Beck hosted a series of episodes on his show under the banner Exposing George Soros, the Puppet Master? Remember Glenn? Is he the dead one? Oh man, please be the dead one. No? Damn it! Also, wow. Wow. And that was just the preview of his episode. I mean, okay. Did that explicitly say that Soros is an evil Jew manipulating the New World Order? No. In fact, I'm not even really sure what it's implying, that Soros is a bad Jew or anti-Semitic himself. Regardless, the imagery in there is, not good. Although that quote in the segment about not wanting to be a part of a Jewish ethno-state is also a real George Soros quote. So I'm sure the rest of Glenn Beck's 2010 Soros video will be totally fair and not unhinged at all. We're going to talk next about Glenn's little video there and what his, and the right's, big accusation is. Specifically, the idea that George Soros is trying to take over the entire world right after we get through the global cabal that are even more ads. Last ad break. I am so proud you made it this far. Hey now, calm yourself. You're experiencing an ad, but not just any ad. This is an ad for the Some More News merch store. Thank goodness. You can relax now knowing that you're still in our protective hands. Close your eyes and listen to me describe our products, which you can find at shop.somemorenews.com. Are you picturing it? It's beautiful. So many shirts and magnets and tote bags that you can wear or hold or burn for warmth. That's right, you can burn our merchandise. We don't care, you bought it already, it's yours! Legally speaking, we aren't responsible for anything you do with our Warmbo magnets. That's the Some More News guarantee. Again, that's shop.somemorenews.com. What are you waiting for? The end of the episode? Come on! That's no excuse. Shop.somemorenews.com. Everybody! There's nobody here. Just go there. It's the only place to get shirts. We're back. We as in me, Cody, and the shadowy puppeteer who shall remain nameless, but also will be named as George Soros, master of puppets, the saint of anger, the ride of the lightning. Before the break, we showed you clips from some totally hinged episodes of The O'Reilly Factor and the Imaginarium of Dr. Glenn Beck. And while O'Reilly set the table, it's Glenn Beck who took that first steamy dump that elevated Soros from an evil leftist rich dude to a Skeletor-level super evil guy in a movie. Gotta think of a new word. So what is his big terrifying plan? Let's watch a clip from Glenn Beck's big unmasking special.
On this program for the last couple of years, we've been telling you about the people and the places and the things that you had never even considered before. At least I hadn't. Most people hadn't. And I told you that there was a structure being put into place in our country, and it was designed to bring about the fundamental transformation that has been promised. Through the course of this journey of discovery, amazingly, all the paths, time after time, really led to one man, George Soros, one guy. There's a crisis collapsing our economy. George Soros. When the administration and the progressives look for a savior to step in and save the day, George Soros. He makes predictions, and his loyal followers make sure they come true. He's pulled no punches about the end game. It's one world government. The end of America's status as the prevailing world power. But why?
But why? What a terrifying end game of unity? Like a Star Trek United Earth? I guess the idea is that it's totalitarian or something like that. It's just funny how the little squirrel man presents it. Anyway, it's that for a half hour. Beck goes back and forth to his chalkboard, talking about groups that have received funding from Soros affiliates, and extrapolating based on, I don't know, the wind, that Soros was days away from establishing a borderless, anarchist, nationwide heroin riot because he was apparently giving orders to Barack Obama. Beck insinuates in this episode that Soros is the one who convinced Obama to push for an additional stimulus package during the financial crisis because of some interview he gave to Der Spiegel. But, of course, most economists at the time widely said such a measure was necessary and argued that the $787 billion bill didn't go far enough. You can debate whether or not that bill was effective, but to suggest that Soros was pulling all the strings just because he agreed with everyone except congressional Republicans that stimulus was necessary, it's quite a stretch. It's like crediting myself for a new Mad Max movie getting made because I said out loud, hey, they should make another one of those. Everybody said that. And this is officially where things begin to go a little bit off the rails, and the Soros conspiracy goes global. That's right, Glenn Beck is still technically on the rails. The use of Soros as an overall Mr. Boogie deepened in the 2010s due to people with pretty nefarious intent, to the point where even many of Soros' employees wondered what the hell was going on. And to understand what, in fact, is going on, we need to look at two political operatives named George Birnbaum and Arthur Finkelstein. And before I go any further, I know what you're saying. Is Cody, Equanimous St. Johnston, pointing the finger at two shadowy Jewish figures and accusing them of conspiring to influence political elections around the world? The answer is yes. No. Damn. Why would you? I'm not. Why would I'm just look? I am pointing to two political figures who happen to be Jewish, but unlike the dabblers in Soros conspiracy theories, we aren't suggesting that their Jewishness has anything to do with those actions, and are in fact coming out right now and saying that the bad things these guys did are because they're assholes, completely unrelated to their religion and or ethnic background. I just want to make that clear because the political campaigns run by Birnbaum and Finkelstein absolutely were anti-Semitic and utilized prejudice against Jews for their benefit. These two dudes developed a certain way of running political campaigns, which proved to be very successful. They recognized that most voters are decided from the get-go, and the way to win elections is to brutally attack an opponent so that their voters are demoralized and stay home. Otherwise known as, I guess, bullying? This BuzzFeed News article, which combed through a ton of political history and is really worth reading in full for the gross nerds who do that kind of thing, credits this strategy with a number of political victories over the last several decades. Notably, Donald Trump seemed to inherently understand this strategy, in effect, when he thanked black voters who stayed home and didn't vote at all in 2016.
And the African American community was great to us. They came through big league. Big league. And frankly, if they had any doubt, they didn't vote. And that was almost as good because a lot of people didn't show up.
Yeah, that's not how we should want democracy to work. Seems bad, and also the primary way elections go now. Anyway, these two guys didn't invent mudslinging or focusing on negativity in political campaigns. But they did fine-tune the process, put it into practice, and then tell everyone about it. Birnbaum and Finkelstein insist that every successful campaign needs an enemy. That enemy can be your opponent or someone you're trying to connect to them. And then you make the election about that, and claim something very scary will happen if you allow them to succeed. First, Finkelstein helped Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rise to power in the mid-1990s by framing the election as a referendum on Social Democrat Shimon Peres, suggesting that Peres planned to split Jerusalem during peace negotiations with Palestinians. Though Peres denied this, it forced him to run his campaign on Netanyahu's terms, on the defensive, and he lost by less than 30,000 votes. Womp womp for the last 3 decades, I guess. Womp being the sound of a bomb hitting a refugee camp. Finkelstein set up his protege, Birnbaum, as Netanyahu's chief of staff, and a partnership was formed. More than a decade later, Netanyahu introduced the pair to Viktor Orban. Hey, I remember Orban, who needed a decisive re-election strategy for 2014. Unlike other elections, however, there was no obvious enemy to focus on. As we discussed in our Hungary episode, Orban's prior victory had been so decisive that his political opposition was in shambles. There simply wasn't an easy target like a Hillary or 80s guy in tank to scare people. So, Finkelstein and Birnbaum pitched Orban on a mysterious foreign enemy around whom he could frame the campaign. George Soros. Despite being very old, not having lived in Hungary for decades, helping Viktor Orban study at Oxford, and, like most Hungarians, being a well-known anti-communist, using Soros as the target made a lot of sense. He was at this point most well known as a currency manipulator and a funder of democratic groups in the United States. He also couldn't fight back, according to Birnbaum, or else that would legitimize the attacks in the first place and set him up as a real physical opponent. You might notice that you've never really seen Soros on Fox News or Bill Maher or anywhere else trying to defend himself. Orban's campaigns in the 2010s painted any organization that had ever received money from a Soros group as Soros-controlled. Orban himself said that Hungary was under attack from, quote, an enemy that is different from us, who does not believe in working but speculates with money. Now, he never specifically called him a Jew, and Birnbaum told a Swiss magazine that Soros being Jewish was irrelevant to their plans, but come on, guys. You know how this goes. That's what makes 2 Jewish Americans' involvement in this entire story ironic. They probably didn't know how far it would go, but they had to have known what button they were pressing. For example, here's an anti-Soros poster from Hungary in 2017, over which someone has written Budosito, which means dirty Jew. Orban didn't have to say it to make it clear what he was implying, and other people did the work for them. People like Benjamin Netanyahu's son, who posted this totally easy-to-follow meme in 2017, which shows Soros controlling Space Godzilla, who himself controls Freemason Palpatine, who in turn controls Randy Newman, Moby, and blurry Dylan McDermott, who I call Dylan McBlurmott. Really super compelling stuff. And that pretty much brings us to the present. This campaign that made Soros the shadowy enemy in Eastern Europe has taken on a life of its own, and he's now accused of being behind nearly every tragedy, real or fictional. Literally search X, the Everything app, for Soros and anything that has happened in the last 20 years. Soros employed Derek Chauvin, who is actually a CIA hitman who carried out Sandy Hook and the Boston bombing. Soros made money off the 2017 Las Vegas mass shooting. Anything bad with Boeing planes? That is Soros. He's the puppet master of all the Democrats, but especially the Jewish ones. He's manipulating all the voting machines, but he also controls the detection system to root out voter fraud. He's behind the Trump trials. He's playing one side against the other, in bed with everybody. He's a Nazi and a Jew. He's responsible for everything, the Alpha and Omega. He is legend. Good Lord. And we could write this off as a bunch of fringe weirdos online if these weren't the fringe weirdos in question.
We can't fight the enemy if we won't call them by name. And these are communists, American communists in Chicago that are taking loads of money from George Soros and others.
People don't really understand the degree to which George Soros is successfully remaking this country, and they should understand.
I'm glad that you're. I'm glad that.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. I'm glad that you're raising awareness about it.
Kind of hard to call people fringe when they have huge national ratings, is my point. And just to be clear, I don't really care about George Soros. I mean, he's really rich and involved in politics, which is bad, but he's also really old, so the issue will fix itself. This episode is not really about poor old George Soros. It's about the real-life dangers that come from making a global anti-Semitic conspiracy theory mainstream. For example, in October 2018, a Florida man mailed pipe bombs to prominent Democrats, actor Robert De Niro for some reason, and Soros. He tweeted, "You will vanish," to Soros, who was a frequently memed topic on his social media profiles. That same month, a 46-year-old man from Baldwin, Pennsylvania, opened fire in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, killing 11 people and injuring 6 others. The shooter regularly reposted anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on Gab, suggesting that a sinister group of wealthy Jews were responsible for the migrant caravan at the southern border, which he referred to as an invasion. Just before the attack, he wrote that HIAS, referring to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, quote, likes to bring invaders in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics, I'm going in. In the weeks before the attack, the lie that George Soros was somehow behind the migrant caravan was repeated by Representative Matt Gaetz in a post that was retweeted by Donald Trump Jr. It was repeated by Ann Coulter, Jack Posobiec, and strongly hinted at by Texas Representative Louis Gohmert.
I can't help but think that the Democrats, perhaps Soros, others may be funding this, thinking it's going to help them, but they're going to be surprised.
Ah, yes, whenever a lot of Central American migrants are heading toward the U.S. border, that's always been a really great thing for Democrats, Louis, you fucking potato. The Tree of Life shooting took place 5 days after that interview, but since the 2018 midterms were the following week, Republicans didn't want to give up that messaging. And this conspiracy that the migrant caravan was funded by a Jewish cabal led by Soros kept going.
A lot of these folks also have affiliates who are getting money from the Soros-occupied State Department.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know who, but I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of people say yes.
A lot of people say yes. Nobody knows what they're talking about, of course. But yes, Mr. President, a lot of people said that. A lot of people, it turns out, subscribe to the Great Replacement theory, the racist and obviously incorrect idea we've talked about plenty of times before, that Jews are trying to replace red-blooded, chicken-fried, corn cream-fed white Americans with Latino migrants. You know, the thing that these guys were ranting about. Anyway, you will not be surprised to learn that soon after the election, people stopped talking about the migrants. But you can see the danger here. Soros is now just a set of jangling keys that Republicans can throw out whenever they want to scare people. The Washington Times says he's on a quest to destroy America. He's building a TikTok army. Arizona Representative Paul Gosar suggested that he funded both the neo-Nazis and counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia. He's behind every protest.
This demonstration on Columbia's ground and all over America is being financed by Soros and other people that hate America.
It literally doesn't matter to them that he's 93 years old. He's so old that Reuters accidentally published an obit saying he was dead more than a decade ago. He's so old that the writer of this episode scrambled to finish it for fear that Soros might die before it is released. The people spreading the conspiracies don't care, though. They'll just make his son Alex the new bad guy, considering that old Georgie has turned control of the empire over to him. After that news came out, Viktor Orban tweeted a Godfather gif and the word Soros 2.0, and Alex Soros is now featured in his party's political billboards. Orban still talks about George Soros all the time.
I know George Soros very well. He is my opponent. He believes in none of the things that we do. And he has an army at his service. Money, NGOs, universities, research institutions, and half the bureaucracy in Brussels.
If George Soros lives to 120 as a disembodied head floating in saline, Orban will keep using him as an enemy. Although, in fairness to Orban, a living, disembodied, floating head in saline sounds pretty fucked up. Get the head! Get it! Get him! Smash the fucked up thing. I think the fact that Soros doesn't really come out and defend himself is why they love using him. After all, look at how modern conservatives function. There's always a boogeyman. If it's not immigrants, then it's gay people, or PC culture, or wokeness, or DEI, or CRT. They don't govern on ideas, after all. Their entire strategy has been to run on being against something. But as that thing always proves to be benign, they always keep changing it. With Soros, you don't have to change a thing. You can just say he's behind whatever bad thing is in the news, or use him to discredit a movement. It's like how every Harry Potter movie ends with Voldemort behind it all. And while this probably won't hurt Soros himself, this has terrible consequences for not just Jews, but also migrants who continue to be demonized. As I just mentioned, there's been so much violence in the name of stopping George Soros, this intangible enemy. And as long as they keep pointing to him as this boogeyman, it's not going to stop. So yeah, that's the deal with George Soros. And honestly, I feel a little guilty for going so easy on this guy. I mean, sure, he's surprisingly right about a bunch of stuff, but he is a billionaire after all. And we could probably do a video about many ways that he sucks. He gambles with other countries' economies and then tries to influence them with all the money. He's been a major investor in ghoulish investment firms like the Carlyle Group, alongside other woke commies like the Bushes and the Bin Ladens. He's private equity. We hate that. And we would so much rather go after the billionaire class for using their money to bend the rules in their favor and making everything worse while continuing to demand that we all love them. But instead, we have to defend this dumb old billionaire who I'm sure has never listened to any of the bands I referenced and explain why demonizing him based on some Elders of Zion nonsense is really bad for everyone. And only ends up helping the real bad guys achieve their super racist goals. It's villains! The word is villains! It's villains. God, that was killing me. Like a bad movie guy would want to be doing. Be wanting to killing me. The bad movie. The villain. I'll remember it. I'll remember it in the future. Anyway, great episode, everybody. Big thanks to our new sponsor for this one, the Soros Fund Management LLC. That is, look, okay. It's a coincidence. It's a coincidence. Normally I improvise like a bit or something at the end. George is beckoning me. Coming, George, I'm so sorry! And then I improvised this part expertly as well as the previous part. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel the video's on. We've got patreon.com/somemorenews. Check us out. Support us there. It'd be great. We've got a podcast called Even More News. We've got another podcast. It's this show as a podcast called Some More News. Check it out at the podcast district. And we've got merch. The merch store is available for shop stuff. We got this. You can't buy this, but you can buy merch with him on it. Wait, what are you doing here? I thought you ran away. Oh no, continuity issues. Oh, I'm so sorry. I heard him. Okay, look, part's over. So, bye.